Hi, everyone. You're listening to episode 2 of UNICEF at UCLA's podcast series on the mental health of immigrants from the southern border. Our guest for this episode is Dr. Cecilia Menjivar, a professor of sociology at UCLA, here to shed light on the situation and explain its impact on immigrants.
Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and the sort of research that you do?
I'm a sociologist by training, and I'm a professor in the Department of Sociology here at UCLA. I do research on two areas: migration, specifically about immigration law and how immigration laws affect the lives of immigrants in their families, in their workplaces, in their places of worship, in relations with others, gender relations. And my other area of work which is connected, it's on violence different forms of violence in in the United States, but also in other countries. State violence, um, different forms of violence that affect the lives of people, structural violence, symbolic violence, and I do that work mostly outside the United States in Central America. So those are my areas of work, and I have written extensively about each of this.
I know you briefly touched on it, but do you have any areas of your work where you more specifically focus on children and how migration has effects on them, both as part of a family unit or independently?
Yes, due to my interest in immigrant families and how immigration laws shape what happens inside the families, but also the contours of family life and how uh, the structure of families, what shape families are going to take for immigrants. I do work on intergenerational relations between parents and children, and also um, how the parents see their children and what the parents want for their children, and relations um, with their children. So that's how. So I approach the study of children through a lens of family, and the lens of family as I see it, is very much shaped by immigration laws that receive immigrants at the places where they arrive.
How do you think the new government, specifically in the United States, can start to resolve their failures to support immigrants, especially children, during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond it?
This is something. Immigration law is extremely complex and has multiple components, and each component has multiple components. So it is not easy to say how the government, the Biden. You're talking about the Biden administration, specifically when you say the new government. Is
Yeah.
that so it's not easy, because just to give you a sense, a very quick 1 point sense of the complexity of immigration law, the previous administration, just in 4 years, passed over 1,000 policies related to immigration that affect immigrant families, immigrant children, immigrant workers. And so the current administration, just to take us back to where things were before the previous administration, would have to undo over 1,000 policies. And so it's a very, very deeply complex issue. The most immediate thing would be to at least allow families who come to the border to at least present their cases for asylum, and that would be at least the very least that can happen, and to facilitate family reunification for parents and children who wish to do that. So that would be something immediate, but I just wanted to contextualize what that would mean in the when we have the full scenario of what immigration law looks like.
I I looked at the article. I know you sent an article that I'll link it in the somewhere for everyone who's watching this in the future to look at. But you kind of mentioned how government policy has played like a really big role in this whole situation, and especially like how the U.S. government has kind of militarized the southern border. Could you like elaborate a little bit on that in like that context that you've been talking about?
Yeah. What I meant by that is that that migrants we see arriving in the United States today, and I'm focusing on Central Americans specifically arriving at the U.S. border, migration that is not that large, relatively speaking, and in absolute terms, but it has attracted so much media attention and politicians' attention that it's made look like a crisis when it's not. And so I've been trying to dispel the notion that this is a crisis when it's because it's not. And the most important point here is that to recognize that these migrants who are arriving at the border today are living contexts in their countries of origin that are violent, and we hear that in the news all the time. But the United States has played a major role in the militarization of life in those countries through the what we call the migration corridor, the, all the way through Mexico and into the US border that is heavily militarized too. And so the role the United States has played in creating those conditions goes back decades, since before there were civil wars. I don't know how much you know about Central America. You may not know anything about it, but there were civil wars in Central America in the 80s. And the United States played a major role, pivotal role in supporting the governments that were fighting the opposition in those countries, and has left a legacy of militarization there that has spiraled out of, from which the violence we see today has spiraled out. So this is what I meant by that. Again, these are very complex things that take much longer to explain because there's so much context, there's so much history, and so much international relations and politics there. But we have to recognize the role of the receiving country in this case in creating the conditions that migrants are fleeing from today.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, why do you think there is an increased trend or perhaps a phenomenon in the deportation and detention of immigrants?
Oh, wow. Books have been written on this. What am I going to do? Let's see. A quick question, a quick answer is related to laws that have been created in the United States and in other receiving countries too, that have increasingly criminalized immigrants' activities and behaviors that place them in deportable situations. And since the late 80s, and definitely since the mid 90s, there have been a series of laws that have been passed that have criminalized a range of behaviors, including jumping subway turnstiles for immigrants, but not for U.S. citizens. And so there's a range of crimes, of misdemeanors and things that will be considered misdemeanor offenses for non-immigrants. For immigrants are considered felonies, and that means and a felony automatically places an immigrant in deportation procedures, or makes them deportable. And so that has contributed to exponentially increase the number of migrants who are being deported, because this was not happening before the mid 1990s.
I want to ask a follow-up question to that. So how might, in your opinion, these laws implemented by the government affect, more specifically, the future of immigrant children who have no place to go?
For children, I guess the effect comes through the parents, because the children are not going to be directly affected by the criminalization of adults, but they will be affected indirectly through losing a parent through deportation, and this is happening quite a bit. Or sometimes the parents don't want to risk being placed in detention and then deportation, and so they prefer to just leave the country and take their U.S. born children with them and raise them in the country they came from originally. So I think those are the impacts that I would see from the criminalization of immigrants to an effect on the children. Losing a parent through deportation or through detention. A lot of people are held in detention indefinitely today, and many of them are parents, and so that affects, of course, the children who lose a parent to detention or deportation.
To kind of go off that, how do you think that these recent events and laws and different policies are going to affect short-term and long-term mental health of migrant children?
I think it's the effects are very are already there. There's research documenting what fear of losing a parent means for the children. There's research documenting a range of effects that this is having on children. Bedwetting at night, also acting up at school, and those are the consequences of fearing that they may lose a parent through deportation. Some children also are being detained themselves as they are separated from their parents. They are being detained, sometimes with a parent, sometimes by themselves, and these children are already showing signs of more serious consequences, and clinical psychologists and social workers are already very worried, documenting what this may look like for the future of these children who are being detained. And detention centers look very much like prisons, and what this may mean for kids who spend months or a year, which for a kid is a significant part of their lives, in detention or living with the parents and fearing that they may lose a parent.
Yeah, also to add on to that question, talking about how the current administration is trying to undo some of the policies of the last administration and the current mental health of migrant children. Do you think that there will be a significant impact on mental health for future generations, or do you see that changing possibly in the future?
The immigration laws, I don't know when they're going to change. It's very, very difficult to change laws. They have to be approved by Congress, and we know that that's not very feasible these days to get the two parties to agree on anything. So who knows when the laws will change. The current administration and future administrations may relax some policies, but changing laws is more difficult. And it can happen, but it may not be something immediate. So this may have, of course, consequences for the future, for children, for the families, for the parents. I don't know how many generations in the future this effect can last, but we know that the longer these laws stay in the books and policies are continue to be practiced, the longer the effect may be on immigrant families, especially Latinos, because it is Latinos who bear the brunt of immigration enforcement in the country today by far.